The 3 American servicemen freed by the Yugoslav authorities after a month in captivity were handed over to the American civil rights leader Jesse Jackson in Belgrade this morning. They've now arrived in Germany, where they'll be reunited with their families. The Reverend Jackson said their release created a diplomatic opportunity. This afternoon it emerged that the Russian peace envoy Viktor Chernomyrdin will be traveling to Washington tomorrow for talks on the crisis.
They knew they were safe and on their way home when their plane touched down at an American airbase in Germany. Christopher Stone, Andrew Ramirez and Stephen Gonzalez were tired and perhaps traumatized, but they were back in the hands of the American military. Their first day of freedom began when the Yugoslav army handed them over to the Reverend Jesse Jackson in Belgrade this morning. On borrowed mobile phones, they broke the news to their families and then set off overland for Croatia on the first step of the long journey home. Thank God Almighty, we're It was Jesse Jackson's personal diplomacy that secured their release, but the first questions to the 3 were personal, not political. What, for example, had Sergeant Ramirez told his mother?
We told her not to make me cry, but of course...
For Mrs. Ramirez back in California, a month of agony was over.
It's coming home. He is coming home. That's all that we needed to hear.
There is talk this evening of a trip to Washington by Russia's special envoy to explore possibilities of movement in all this. Possibilities Mr. Jackson clearly hopes he's advanced.
We hope that their release is a diplomatic gesture that will receive an in-kind diplomatic response.
As the 3 soldiers begin to adjust to their freedom in privacy this evening, there is still no clear picture of where a solution to this crisis is going to emerge. NATO has said their release is just a gesture that doesn't change the underlying situation in Kosovo.
Well, for the latest on that new Russian peace initiative, over to our correspondent in Moscow, Rob Parsons. Rob, what have you heard about the initiative?
Well, it's not very clear what the substance of it is. All we've heard today is that President Yeltsin called a meeting of his defense minister, foreign minister, prime minister, and Viktor Chernomyrdin, the special envoy, who's just come back from the talks in Belgrade. He then phoned President Clinton in Washington and asked for the meeting with Mr. Chernomyrdin. Bill Clinton agreed to it. And Mr. Chernomyrdin is heading off to the United States for a meeting with Mr. Clinton tomorrow. What the substance of their talks is going to be, nobody really knows. But at this stage, it's hard to be optimistic, given the initial reactions to Mr. Chernomyrdin's visit. NATO was fairly negative about it. It's difficult to see that Russia has achieved very much more in the meantime.
So unlikely to have any effect on NATO's military campaign, you'd say?
I would have thought it would be very unlikely to have any effect at this stage on NATO's military campaign. I suppose the question really is this linked in any way to the talks that have been going on in Vienna over the last couple of days between involving US congressional element and Russian MPs and an aide to President Milosevic. They appear to be relatively optimistic that they may have got some movement from the Yugoslavs on the question of an armed international force in Yugoslavia. But whether that really is at the core of all this remains to be seen yet.
Rob, thank you. Well, NATO has admitted that one of its bombs did destroy a bus full of civilians on a bridge in Kosovo yesterday. A spokesman said the bus moved onto the bridge after the bombs were released. The Yugoslav authorities say 47 people were killed. NATO has also confirmed the loss of 2 planes. An F-16 went down in Serbia and a US Harrier was lost over the Adriatic. This report from John Simpson in Belgrade.
In much of Yugoslavia, there's been no let-up. This was an oil refinery at Novi Sad. Only Belgrade was given an easier time, perhaps because the Reverend Jesse Jackson was still there. The aftermath of yesterday's attack that went wrong. NATO says the bus wasn't on the bridge when the missile was fired, and it has apologized for the deaths and injuries. 47 people are now said to have died here. A nearby hospital cared for the 16 people who were most seriously hurt. Yet now the Yugoslav authorities have actually revised downwards the official casualty figures for the NATO campaign. 420 civilian deaths and 400 serious injuries altogether. This is the burned-out clearing 50 miles west of Belgrade, where an F-16 plane crashed at 1:30 in the morning. Shot down, the Serbs say. NATO says it suffered engine failure. The forest floor is littered with broken parts. pilot hid out close by and was rescued 2.5 hours later by helicopter.